Hi. Christians fall all over themselves to promote that God is love, 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 and forgiving, and merciful, and compassionate. Hasn't the church propagated John 3:16? For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son over and over and over again, and rightly so. Is there anything more inspiring than the account of a parent who selflessly gives up their own life to save that of their child's? But that fond perspective is not so easily shared by some others. For example, there's ample Facebook posts that characterize this so-called loving God as anything but, like this one. Or this one. Are these simply social media banters holding no real credibility and can be brushed off without a second thought? Should the religious person cast them away like they are nothing? But if so, then what about the following verse? If there is found among you, Israel, a man or woman who does evil in the sight of the Lord your God, in transgressing his, God's, covenant, and has gone after and served other gods and worshipped them, or the sun, or the moon, or any of the hosts of heaven, which I have forbidden, you shall stone that man or woman to death with stones. Whoa, wait, God is sure hard on ancient Israel. Where's the love? Stoning to death? Okay, maybe that's just one passage and we can try and explain it away or even hope that no one reads it. Except for blasphemy, idolatry, worshiping other gods, as previously mentioned, witchcraft, rebellious sons, idolatry, one's oxen gores a person, genocide. These people deserve death? Consider Richard Dawkins' description of God. He accused the Judeo-Christian God as being, quote, petty, unjust, unforgiving, a vindictive, bloodthirsty ethnic cleanser, and a God who's ordering the killing, or puts it, the bloody massacres of the Canaanites can be justly labeled as some xenophobic relish. Quote. Is Dawkins accurate? Is the Judeo-Christian God far from loving, and we should run from him and Christianity as fast as we can? Maybe even run from all religion for that matter. I intend to undertake this question and its implications on the whole credibility of Judeo-Christian faith. As it has roots in the Judeo-Christian scriptures, I'm going to do this by means of a video series. I say series because dumping this entire evaluation to one video would be way too long as to solicit viewing. And then there's a temptation to slap on some short, all-encompassing blub that leaves the true questioner doubtful of the simplistic answer. I think that honest questioners want well-thought-out replies, and as such are willing to undergo a deeper foray into the times and practices of ancient Israel, in which these verses were written. So I get that your time is not to be taken for granted. Thus I will, when applicable, provide first a short answer, and then, secondly, expound on it for those desiring more thought. Maybe you're hoping for an overall summary for where we'll be going in this series. In Is God a Moral Monster? Paul Copan tackles this question about the character and conduct of God. He observes how the various rites, polygamy, warfare, and so on are part of the, quote, fallen social arrangements, unquote, of the human heart during the initial formation of the Israelite people group during their initial formation as they were disembarking on the Exodus out of Egypt. He stipulates that God gave them a simple covenant code in Exodus 20. Granted, he considers the instructions concerning personal injury, property protection, social responsibility, annual feasts, etc. as simple. However, when the Israelite people rebelled in Exodus 32 and Leviticus 10, he stipulates that God enacted more stringent laws. The reason for this progressive legislation was, to God's credit, his putting up with inferior, less than ideal societal structures and human disobedience. He cites Acts 17 and Romans 3 as support for this divine forbearance. In other words, God was, as he says, working with Israel just as they are at the point in ancient Near East, imperfect, disobedient, obstinate. I recognize that some may be greatly offended at this thought. Isn't God completely and absolutely sovereign on absolutely everything? To even hint otherwise is to insult God, right? I get this line of thinking. However, when we look at Scripture to include Jesus lamenting over Israel in Luke 13, don't we see God desiring humanity to do one thing, but humanity does the opposite? This doesn't make God weak. It speaks of his magnanimousness, where he created us with free will to obey him or not. That does not mean God's greater purposes or sunum donum isn't achieved, but it does have amazing explanatory power as to why humanity disobeys so very much. Otherwise, you would have God desiring, even commanding humanity to obey him, but at the same time, God willing or causing humanity to disobey the very thing he wants. Christian, would you want God to will you to sin like you have no option but to do it? Conversely, atheists, do you want God to will you to choose him to take away your free choice in the matter? So to reject Copan's premise that God was enacting a progressive legislation in the name of a particular view of sovereignty leaves us, to be quite frank, with the specter of fatalism and the faulty idea that there was one God in the Old Testament, and not a good one at that, and a totally different God in the New Testament. I won't cover that here, but there's tons of material showing the error of that assertion. Thus, the Sinai legislation was not meant to completely overhaul their current, at that time, society moral structure. It was some beginning steps toward an ideal of human ethics as portrayed in the Garden of Eden, but lost upon humanity's sin rebellion, and then later expressed in the person of Jesus Christ. Michael Pale describes this, what was but not final, as a trajectory to a Christ-centered biblical narrative. Have you ever wondered why some of the rules, the commandments of the beginning books of the Bible hasn't stayed the same throughout the Bible? Theologians call this God's progressive revelation. It isn't where God tried some rules but then was taken by surprise when the people didn't do them, like God was going, what? Oh no, what do I do now? No, God knows us so well that he exactly knows how we will respond in any given set of circumstances. Copan conjectures that the ancient Israelite people would not have been able to handle such a rapid change in their moral ethics due to what he calls their, quote, power of choice, unquote. They would have turned away from what they did not understand at that time. And why wouldn't they have been able to grasp a brand new approach to ethics? Copan goes on to say that given certain fixed assumptions in the ancient Near East, God didn't impose legislation that Israel wasn't ready for. He moved incrementally. Copan continues, in fact, Israel's laws reveal dramatic moral improvements over the practice of their ancient Near East people. God's act of incrementally humanizing ancient Near East structures for Israel meant diminished harshness and an elevated status of debt servants, even if certain negative customs weren't fully eliminated. God didn't throw up his hands in despair and leave Israel just as they were. No, he started working toward his original ideal from Genesis, the way that God desired humanity to be in the beginning. But humanity's free will, their choosing to disobey God, brought the house down. Humanity's nature changed, and part of that change is disobedient of what God desires for us. When we ask why there's evil and suffering in the world, the answer is us, not God. We not only choose the worst of ways, we actually want those ways. And God has to work with humanity as a whole with that in place. I think that there's one verse that so captures this thought, and it's the one I already mentioned and will again. Matthew 23:37 reports Jesus is lamenting, O Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophet and stones those who are sent to it. How often would I have gathered your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you were not willing. Do you see humanity's evil actions, killing and stoning the very ones who were to help them? Yet, the very Prince of Peace is rejected? That's what God has to work with. That's Kopan's short or overall answer that serves as a template for this series. But let's dive deeper so as to not scoff off your objections or questions like whether God endorses slavery or not. For that, see the end note that follows. Thanks for watching.